If you're watching this video, the question you want answered is most likely whether you should be checking out Tinkerlands for yourself. You might also be interested in how Tinkerlands stacks up against similar games such as Core Keeper, Terraria, or Necesse. Well, in this video I'm going to dive into all of that, and I'm also going to talk about what I think the game still needs and what I hope to see from future updates. To start off the video, I think it's important we first talk about the gameplay loop and how the general progression in the game is, what you're doing. So Tinkerlands is a crafting survival game that can be played by 1 to 4 players. The gameplay loop is very similar to Terraria. In general, Tinkerlands is a lot like a top-down Terraria. It's heavily inspired by Terraria. So Tinkerlands has this familiar cyclical progression of going out to get new stuff that you can then use to craft new tools, new armor, new weapons, which you can then use to progress into new areas to get even more new stuff that you can then use to craft even better stuff. So if you're familiar with any of the aforementioned games, then you likely know what I'm talking about. This is a game where you go out to get copper, you smelt said copper into bars, you turn the bars into a new pickaxe, a new axe that you then use to go and mine iron, and so forth. Along the way, you're fighting a bunch of enemies, and there's a pretty good enemy variety in Tinkerlands. You're getting equipment, you're getting armor sets. Armor has some defensive stats, which reduces the damage you take, and you get some set bonuses for wearing a full set of armor. Aside from that, you have 6 accessory slots available in Tinkerlands, and these can do various things, such as offer you a light source. They can allow you to traverse into new biomes safely, protecting you from the cold or from the sandstorms of the desert. They can increase your melee damage or your ranged damage. This system is very similar to what you'd find in both Terraria and Necesse, and these accessories can also later on be combined into new and more powerful accessories, allowing you to basically wear combinations of several accessories. There's also reforging in the game, again similar to Terraria and Necesse, where you can get some bonus stats on your items. As a baseline, Tinkerlands have 3 combat archetypes: magic, melee, and ranged. And while there is summons in Tinkerlands, they're not exactly on par with a full archetype like they are in Terraria, for instance. That being said, you have multiple weapon types, you have staffs, you have spells, you have bows, you have boomerangs, spears, swords, daggers, scythes, you name it. There's a lot of different weapons. A lot of these are fairly similar though, but there are big differences in their range and possible special effects. You can craft a lot of different arrows as well. And you even have accessories that will, for instance, turn regular arrows into fire arrows, or a bow that will turn your regular arrows into a throwable leaf instead, which deals more damage. The combat in Tinkerlands is pretty well telegraphed, but compared to Terraria, it is a lot different because you can't, jump, and you can't really stay away from the enemies in the same way you can in Terraria. This is a very familiar thing if you played Core Keeper or Necesse, so in that way it doesn't really feel different. And you have a dash available, or at least you can get a dash available, which helps you dodge attacks. So all in all, I think the combat is simple like you'd expect from these games, but it's also pretty interesting, and there is a pretty high skill ceiling with the dodging and avoiding. There is sometimes too many or too few enemies depending on what you're doing in the game, but the game does have options for you to essentially adjust this, as there's potions that will both increase or reduce spawn rate of enemies, and this is something that's actively being tweaked by the developers based on feedback. In terms of difficulty, Tinkerlands is a pretty forgiving game, especially considering that there's 3 different difficulties you can play on, and so you have options to play on different difficulties. However, you can't change the difficulty on the fly. You instead need to create a new world at a higher or lower difficulty depending on what you choose, but you can bring over your character, so you will just have to play in different worlds if you want to play on different difficulties, so that's something to be aware of. You also spend a lot of time in Tinkerlands hunting down the various NPCs, so you can build houses for them and move them into your village, which will allow you to essentially get new shops available or new crafting options. Like Core Keeper and Terraria Necesse again, Tinkerlands features both fishing, farming, and cooking. And both fishing and cooking have a little minigame attached to them. I'm not a big fan of the cooking minigame, as that's a very reflex-based game, but I'm actually really enjoying the fishing minigame, which is based on essentially you move left or right, and doing so will move the bobber that way, but whenever you tap that way, your fishing bobber will also raise. So it's this balancing act of like tapping it so your bobber doesn't go too far above the fish. But yeah, anyways, I think it's an interesting fishing minigame, and you can also catch treasure sometimes, so I really like that. Farming is very simple. You just use a hoe and you pop in a seed, and that's that. In terms of the multiplayer in Tinkerlands, there's not too much to say. It works pretty flawlessly when there's not bugs and stuff. And the only thing to really be aware of is that it's only the host that can control the ship for going to different islands. And when you choose to go to a different island, once the host travels, everyone will travel with the host. And that's the only real caveat there is to the multiplayer, and it's not a real issue in my book. So with that, let's actually talk about the ship. The ship becomes available probably roughly a third of the way into the game. And once you get the ship repaired and you can use it, you can essentially use the ship to go to different smaller randomly generated islands. And these can have different biomes you basically can see on the map, whether it's a jungle island or a ghostlands island or a desert island or what type of island it is. And there's also a different difficulty attached to each of these islands. So at this point, your goal basically becomes to progress through these biomes in the same way as you have been doing with getting the new materials, getting the new type of metal, the new type of wood, crafting new tools, crafting new armor, slaying a boss, and then unlocking new islands. It's worth noting that it does come with a cost attached to travel to these islands, and that these islands are also random, and you can use a rare drop that you can also purchase in the game that essentially re-rolls the map and allows you to travel to different versions of the same islands, or sometimes even other islands. This system should feel pretty familiar to anybody who's played Necesse, because it is very heavily inspired by Necesse, I would say. It's a pretty good system though, and it is quite a bit different than Necesse in the sense that a lot of the exploration is in the overworld and not in an underground cave on the islands. The islands can also be a lot bigger than they typically are in Necesse, so it feels more like you're going to an actual big island and explore. That being said, once you've seen a jungle a couple of times, there's not that much new to see. Like, even though it's randomly generated, you'll see most of what a jungle has to offer the first or second time you go to a jungle. So it's not like the replayability is that great necessarily, though there are mobs that have rare drops that you'll want to farm. So it's not like you will go to the jungle and then be done in no time either. Currently in the game's early access state, there's, as far as I've been able to count, roughly 13 different like main biomes where there's a boss attached, or like specific armor and tools you can get related to this biome. There's also 14 bosses in the game, and that's a fair amount of bosses, I think, and I'm pretty happy with that. However, there is a bit of repetition in the bosses where some of the bosses are essentially just reskins of bosses you've already fought. So I would like to see a bit more of a variety here. Like, I don't mind a more difficult reskin of a boss, but I think the game would benefit a lot from a few more unique bosses as well. And so there is a lot of content packed in this game already, even though it just released into early access. And we probably spent roughly 30 hours completing the game, taking out time, granted, but you could probably rush through the game in like 10 hours or so if you know what you're doing. But I think there's a solid 30 hours of content here, and also more if you're a completionist. But being an early access game, Tinkerlands has quite a lot of quality of life. And I'm really thankful that it does. It has quick stack to nearby chests, it has crafting from storage, it has automatically opening doors. Like, there's a lot of these little things in here. I really like the optional toolbar you can enable, where you can have essentially 2 tools equipped at once. So if you left click, you'll use one tool, and if you right click, you'll use the other tool. But you also have the option to just use a traditional 1 through 10 hotbar where you can scroll through the tools just like you'd see in Terraria or Core Keeper or Necesse or Stardew Valley or whatever. The developers have also been very responsive and have been hard at work fixing buff and adding even more quality of life, such as torches now provide a glow as long as you just have them in your offhand so you can see. That being said, the game has had quite a bit of issues with especially crashing and also some corrupted save files. And it's my impression that with the newest patch, this is better, but it's just something to be aware of, that if you're sensitive to bugs and crashes, then maybe hold off a little, even though aside from the crashes, I think my experience have been mostly quite polished, especially considering, again, it's a very early access game. In terms of the sound design and the visuals, a lot of people will remark on how it's very similar to Forager, and it is. It's also a very charming game to look at. Personally, I think Core Keeper is by far the most charming game to look at out of any of these similar games. So I don't think Tinkerlands has Core Keeper beat here in any way, but I do really enjoy the visuals of Tinkerlands as well, and I think it's overall just a really fun game. Before we go into the pros, the cons, what I'd like to see from future updates and my comparison to Terraria Necesse and Core Keeper, I should also mention that there's no durability in Tinkerlands and there's no penalties for dying. Like, you don't lose your stuff when you die. The only real penalty is that, of course, you have to run back to where you came from. So it's still annoying dying, but there's no real punishment to it. So just thought that was important to mention because that can be a deal breaker to some people. And I should actually also mention that if you're thinking about playing Tinkerlands, I'd strongly recommend playing the demo. your save files should carry over to the full game, and you should be able to easily spend like 5 hours or so in the demo and get a feel for whether you like the game or not. Just know that there is a difference between how the game plays, because the demo takes place only on the main island, and so it's like the first third of the game or so. But later on, you'll obviously unlock all these different islands, and they are different because they're randomly generated, whereas the main island, while also randomly generated, is static for your whole save, and it's a really big island with different biomes. So it's just something to be aware that the gameplay does change in the latter half of the game. And with that, let's get into first the pros. I really enjoy Tinkerlands, as I'm sure you know if you've been watching any of my other videos. There's fun loot in the game. I just love the accessories. I love combining the accessories. It feels extremely satisfying once you combine like 4 different accessories, and all of a sudden you can both run fast and you have an extra dash, and when you dash you're also immune to dashing, and you shoot out poison spores while dashing, and you just get all these effects combined. I just think combining accessories feels great, and it triggers something in my brain chemistry, releasing a bunch of dopamine whenever I can combine these accessories or get a really cool one. I also think the progression is just fun, and it's a well-tried progression model, so of course it is. I like this progression of getting the copper tools, then the iron tools, then the gold tools, and so forth. I also think it's a major pro the amount of content we have in the early access. Like, I think if you can play an early access game for a solid 30 hours and feel like you've actually completed the game, then that's a good early access. Like, great. No complaints in my book. I love all the quality of life, especially quick stack and craft to storage are just so mandatory in these types of games. In my opinion, I don't enjoy the nitty gritty of picking through all my chests and whatnot. I think a demo being available is a huge plus, and yeah, really seriously go play it if you're at all interested. I really like the crafting in general, and yeah, that's also a well-tested model, like very similar to Terraria and Core Keeper and so on. So again, of course, it's great. And I really like the developers' vision. The developers haven't set out to create a truly unique game or a very innovative game. Instead, it seems like the developers have just said, hey, let's make a new Terraria, but top down, and let's just do our own thing, but use what we already know works. And it's obviously not the same, but there is a lot of easily recognizable stuff, and I don't think a game needs to be innovative to be fun. It's okay to just make a fun video game. So that's my pros for Tinkerlands. As for the cons, I think the bugs, crashes, and especially corrupted save files are a big no-no. It's obviously early access, so it's understandable, and it's great that the devs are very active and trying to fix these issues. And as far as I can tell, have, at least on my end. I haven't crashed for a while now, but corrupted save files especially is, it really sucks. Like, we did have an issue where my girlfriend crashed while we were playing the game. We played it fully in co-op, and she crashed and she lost a bunch of items. And, well, this wasn't even a corrupted save file, but she just lost a bunch of items due to a crash. I did also have one corrupted save file, but thankfully the backup save file worked, so I only lost like 10 minutes of progress. But if you've just found a super rare drop, something like that sucks. And if you were to lose your whole save file, I would be very mad after 30 hours, especially if I was going for a completionist playthrough. Again, I fully understand early access, it's fair enough. But yeah, that's a big con. I hope this gets fixed and we don't have recurring issues with this. Another con is something I didn't actually mention before, but given that it's a top-down game, there's sometimes too much clutter on the ground, in my opinion. Like, especially in the jungle, you can very easily get stuck on clutter, and so you can't avoid enemies as well as you feel you should be able to, and it just feels bad. That being said, it's not a deal breaker or anything, it's just a slight annoyance, basically, and I would like to see this tweaked a little. Then there's also this thing that when you're in caves, it's very dark. But if you go into graphic settings, you can turn on low specs mode, and all of a sudden you can see everything in the caves. It doesn't feel very good having to go into options every time you go into a cave, but also you can't see if you don't do it. But also it's a little too overpowered, because if you do it, then you can see everything and light sources are just irrelevant, but the game looks worse. So they need to do something with this too, I think, with just making the light radius around you bigger in general. Then I also don't like, as mentioned, the low replayability of how once you've seen a biome, it feels like you've kind of seen all versions of this biome. It's not to say that there is low replayability, but I would like to see more unique stuff in the biomes, and we'll get more into that in a sec. And my last con is that it is not a very innovative game. Like, this game is essentially just It could just as well be Terraria top-down or Necesse or Core Keeper. Like, it's ripping off all these games in some ways, and I don't mean that as a bad thing, because as mentioned before, I think it's actually a good thing. They're just trying to make a fun game, and none of these games owns these models. Well, Terraria maybe kind of does, but I think it's great that they're just making a good game. Like, I love Terraria, and I'd love to play more new Terraria, and more new Core Keeper and more new Necesse. So it is a con that the game is not very innovative, but also it's not really, because the game is fun and that's all that matters. And so with that, let's talk about what I'd like to see from future updates here during the early access. And what I'd really like to see is I'd like to see more active accessories, more active stuff. Because currently the only active thing you have is that you can dash. But if you look at the similar games, you can get other accessories, such as even in Core Keeper, you can get a teleport or a shield or something simple. And this is something I wanted more of in Core Keeper as well. But I'd really like more of it here, because while I like the dash, I'd love to have another keybind for another active accessory. And I think it'd be okay to have 2 active buttons. And I'd especially like some variety here. And it's fine if you have to make some hard choices as well. I'd like more content. Obviously, we also know that more content is coming, but what I would really love is a second main island, like a whole island with several biomes on it and its own little story, you could say, I guess. I know that this is probably a really big ask to make a whole new world with interconnected biomes and everything instead of just separate new biomes, but I really like what they've done with the main world, and also with how as you play through the game, you'll see changes in the main world similar to what you'll see in Terraria, like when you activate hard or hard mode after defeating the wall of flesh. You experience the same in Tinkerlands to some degree. After slaying a certain boss, something will change somewhere in the world. And so I'd really love to see a second like main island where you could possibly also build your base, because currently you can only build your base on the main island. Then I would also really like to see more rare islands on the ship map. Like currently you can get one that's just like an item shrine, so it's just a guaranteed chest on the island. But I'd like to have, I don't know, 50 little random, very rare islands that you just, every once in a while you reroll and you see a new island you've never seen before with maybe a unique accessory specific to only this island, or maybe just has a unique NPC, or I don't know, like the sky's the limit for ideas here, but I'd really like to see more of this type of stuff. Currently, the game does have a few other islands like Goblin Island and Trichroma Island, which aren't mandatory islands to go to progress the game, but I'd like more different islands like these. I love both Goblin and Trichroma Island. They're really fun to go to the first time. Again, there's the whole replayability thing we've already talked about, but yeah, I'd like more like that. I'd like more random events and more super rare loot, and this would also help with the replayability, because if you could encounter more random events, then there'd be higher replayability of going to the jungle, because maybe the 7th time you go to the jungle, you actually encounter something you haven't encountered before, and I think that'd be really cool. Then I'd love to see more summoner support. It's not that this game has to copy Terraria and Necesse and Core Keeper, but since it's already kind of doing that, then let's get that summoner support, and I kind of expect we will see it. I'd also really like to see cooking tweaked, as mentioned. I just don't like that minigame, but maybe some people do. Maybe that's just a subjective thing, but it's not for me, that minigame at least. And then I'd really like to see equipment sets like we see in, well, all the Core Keeper, Terraria, and Necesse, where you can have different setups. So I can have my fishing setup just permanently equipped without having to be wearing fishing accessories while I'm in combat, but instead I can just press a keybind and switch to my fishing setup. So that's also something I both fully expect them to add, but also really hope that they add. And also I'd really like to be able to turn cosmetic items. I think it's really weird when I'm placing down my bed that I can't turn it, so it's going sideways and only one direction. Again, I know it's a big ask, because that means you have to animate the items from the side as well, but yeah, this is something I really hope we get sooner rather than later as well. And so lastly, if you're sitting here thinking, well, should I play Necesse or Core Keeper, Terraria or Tinkerlands? Which one should I do? Which one is the best? I mean, I can't answer that for you because it's subjective, but also I'm gonna say it's Terraria. I'm sorry, but it is. Terraria has so much content. That being said, I don't think this is a choice between one or the other, because I think you should play all these games. They're all great, and they all have something to offer, whether it's more or less unique. They're all really fun games, and so I think you should play all of them. If you don't like the side-scrolling nature of Terraria, jumping and all this stuff, then and you prefer top-down vision, well, then you should obviously not play Terraria. And then I'd probably recommend going with Core Keeper, because I think Core Keeper is excellent and is arguably, at least if I'm trying to be objective quotation marks, the better of the games. Core Keeper is just very, I really like the art style in Core Keeper, and it's such a big world and there's so much stuff going on and the storytelling is great. Even though it's like environmental storytelling, but it's just so charming. But for me personally, and Necesse is also great, but for me personally, Tinkerlands just hits a bit different than both Necesse and Core Keeper for me. It feels more like Terraria, and I, as I mentioned, really like Terraria. The loot just feels more interesting, more fun to me, and I don't really know why, because I think the loot is really fun in Necesse as well. I do feel Core Keeper is missing the accessories a bit in comparison to the others. It doesn't have the same variety in all these extra accessories or equipables, whatever you want to call them. But for me, Tinkerlands really does feel the closest to Terraria in terms of what the loot feels like and what the progression feels like. Even though, yeah, all the games are very similar because they're all inspired by Terraria. Tinkerlands is also working on revamping the NPCs, kind of similar to what we have in Necesse, where it's more of a management, like a town management type of game. Not to the same degree, I think, but to at least allow NPCs to come out with you on missions or, yeah, change their AI up, basically. If you like this type of stuff, with the town management and so on, then I definitely think Necesse is the game. Like, Necesse is doing this stuff really well, and it has that RimWorld inspiration. And so, yeah, I mean, it kind of depends what you like, but I think you should really play all of them. That is my advice. Bottom line is that Tinkerlands is really fun, and as is Core Keeper, and as is Necesse, and as is Terraria. So, yeah. I hope this video has been helpful. I know I've been rambling a lot, but I figured I'd just try to give you like my honest impressions, thoughts on this, instead of writing a full, very nuanced script, because I just feel like this topic is more of a discussion topic than it is, I don't know, essay style topic. At least to me it is. And I think, well, I hope at least that you found it helpful. So with that, thank you so much for watching. Have a very nice day. Until next time.